We're running. You've written, Brian, my life has been one long spiritual migration into a broader, deeper, and more generous faith. Mine too. My career parallels yours in many ways.
I paid attention.
And I grew up in white Southern Baptist fundamentalism. The epicenter of it in some ways.
Yeah.
And so the talk this morning about being 70, 75, not too late to leave your father's house. What a wonderful insight to a congregation this morning that had to be an average age of 70 or 75.
I think that's right.
And
you could just feel it in the room, couldn't you?
You could. And at the lunch table, we had a conversation about this and about who's leaving, who's still in the process of leaving, and everybody on a journey, and all of us still in these white patriarchal churches.
Yes.
But we're thinking outside the box, and we're thinking over the horizon.
Yes.
And there's kind of a dissonance in what's going on inside of us and what's going on in our institution. So I wanted to ask you about the Pope Francis.
Great.
If there's any person that's struggling with dissonance, it has to be him.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
Because he, and what he says and does, is where you want us all to be.
Yeah.
But he's in the most patriarchal.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be the top patriarch, so.
That's right.
The arch-patriarch.
He's the arch-patriarch of all patriarchs. In your book, The Great Spiritual Migration, I want to ask you about something. You write about, we have set an inspiring goal to identify first 100 and then 1,000, 10,000 vital faith communities who share these commitments, 10 commitments. Tell me about this. Is this a movement? Is it organized? Is there a website?
Well, it's complicated.
Yes.
It's complicated because I think the kind of movement that can happen and that needs to happen now will be different than ones in the past. You know, civil rights movement, we had a Dr. King. Although, interestingly, you find out when you delve a little deeper that there was a lot of tension and not everybody was super happy with Dr. King's role. And there were a bunch of powerful women and brilliant women who were doing some amazing things, and they tend to get skimmed over, you know. And so I think it's a bit that way now. I think what we'll end up seeing is lots of what some people call micro movements, but that learn how to move in formation, fly in formation, so to speak. You know, lots of little V's of geese heading south. And I think that's happening, but I think we're at a very delicate time, and I don't think anything is set in stone. In other words, I don't think anyone can say, oh good, it's happening. We can take a deep breath and relax. I think everything is fragile. We could have a breakthrough, and we could be set back 500 years.
Has the Trump Christian movement set us back?
I think it's done both. I think it's done both. I was just doing some reading this week that 81% voted for Trump, but similar percentage voted for Richard Nixon of white evangelicals, similar percentages voted for George W. Bush. So in a way, this is just a continuation. What's maybe shocking is that that the number didn't go down from 80%.
Because of his personal style and demeanor and that sort of thing.
Exactly. But I think actually the enthusiasm level is higher. I think they're more enthusiastic for Trump than they were for Richard Nixon and others because he's a fighter. Because I think what's ruling right now, I think what we're seeing right now is that deeper than our theology and deeper than our spirituality, there's some social psychology and anthropology, sociology at work. And we've got an embattled tribe who's used to having privilege And someone has said that when you lose your privilege, it feels like persecution. And so they feel persecuted and embattled, and they have a champion. They think he cares about them. They think he'll fight for them.
But he doesn't.
Of course, all he's doing is using them. But if you're desperate enough, you overlook that, I think.
And of course, in your talk this morning, you mentioned the rapture.
Yeah.
It is astounding that it has wormed its way into the State Department and is driving policy.
Yeah. Yeah, what's really scary and bizarre, almost you couldn't, I'm a writer, a novelist couldn't have written this.
You couldn't have dreamed it up.
It wouldn't have seemed plausible. But there is a Muslim left behind scenario. There is Muslim apocalyptic theology. And to have the world's second largest religion and the world's largest religion be moving toward this confrontation, each with an end time scenario in which they emerge and kill all their foes. I mean, it's horrible, it's ugly. And the Christian one is more ugly because the Christians have more weapons and more money and more numbers. Yeah, it's bizarre. And especially, what's so absolutely tragic is here we're facing this environmental crisis. The perspective of nuclear war is, you would think that's a horrible enough possibility. But add to that now this kind of slow detonation of detonating millions of tons of carbon in the atmosphere that creates instead of one big conflagration, a slow heating. It's bizarre. But right when we need people to do long-term planning, we've got a bunch of people who think that that's unfaithful because long-term there's no hope. So it's a suicidal.
And we're not going to get there because this scenario, this rapture scenario, is going to play out and interrupt all of that.
Yep.
So why deal with all of that? And to think that this is in the State Department, driven by these Christian people that you and I grew up with. I still have my mother's Schofield Reference Bible. Yeah. I'm sure you've read one many times.
In fact, both of my parents died, and I had a box full of old Schofield Reference Bibles that I didn't want anymore, so I disposed of them. But, yeah.
Well, I've kept my mother's, for that very reason. It's sentimental, but it's still, it's an artifact, a powerful, influential literary artifact that is now shaping
foreign policy, ecological policy, economic policy.
Who would have thought that what was it, 1828, that Brethren girl over there in the J.N. Darby, I've got my facts right here.
That's about it, in the 1830s. This doctrine that had never been conceived of before, of a secret rapture of the church where people would fly away. It's so bizarre.
It is so bizarre.
It's like a conspiracy theory and the weirdest interpretation of Bible verses, I remember the funniest one is even that word left behind. When you actually read that text, two people will be working in the field, one will be taking the other left. Well, taken means taken by the enemy forces who come and kill you. To be left is to survive.
Yes.
You want to be left behind.
They flip the whole meaning. The people who are left behind are the righteous.
That's right.
Not the wicked. So they flip the whole meaning.
The whole thing is bizarre. But of course, I grew up. We were the ones who had the truth. And
that's right.
I get emails. I have a cousin,
Don't we all?
She's the sweetest person. She sends me these emails praising Jesus, that we're almost at the time of our homecoming because the signs are all here for the rapture. And she's so sincere. And she has a lifetime of being rewarded for this kind of talk and it being seen as pious. And she's sincere. She derives deep comfort from it. But meanwhile, I just think, oh my gosh, if she only knew,
I still have the little book on my shelf, 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988.
I remember that one.
Yes, and of course Hal Lindsey and all of that.
Yeah.
And yet here we are again,
of
course fueled by the Left Behind series in popular literature.
Yeah.
that has made it so dramatic. And here you are, here we are pushing back against this
Yes.
and saying the future looks very different than that.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, are we making any headway? Is there any hope? Where do you see signs of hope for the version of Christianity that you want?
Well, as you can imagine, I get asked that quite a bit, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I always feel...
So you should be really prepared for this answer, right?
Yeah, I'm really unprepared. I'll tell you why. Because I think I agree with Greta Thunberg, who says, I don't want you to have hope. She says, I want you to panic because the house is on fire. And I think when a lot of times we ask about hope, we ask because we say, give me some statistics, some data, some encouraging trends so I can go back to being complacent. And I think, I know that's not what you're asking. I think the flip side of it is, give me some encouraging trends and data so I don't give up hope and so I don't just lapse into despair. So if your choices are complacency or despair, what those both have in common is you stop fighting and you stop doing what's right. So the kind of hope I would rather have is the deep hope that would say, even if I were 100% sure that I'm going to fail, this is what I would do because I think it's the right thing to do. It's the only way I can live with myself. I was talking with an environmental activist recently. She says, I've lost faith. She says, I've lost hope. She says, I don't even think all of my efforts are going to work. She says, but I can't give up because I couldn't live with myself. And I said to her, it sounds like your faith is gone and your hope is gone. All that's left is love. And she said, I guess I'm just trying to love what's left with the time I have left. And I thought, you know, that might sound despairing, but it's heroic and it's deep. And to me, that's Jesus going to Jerusalem, even though he knows it's looking bad.
Setting his face, you know.
And you know, on the Holy Thursday, Jesus isn't there saying, help me get through a few hard hours tomorrow because I know I'm going to be raised from the dead and I'll be okay.
No, that's not even saying.
He's facing the absolute collapse and failure of everything that he's preached and worked for. And I just think that that is the deepest kind of hope, that you do it anyway, against all the evidence and so on. However, there is a legitimate part to your question I don't want to minimize. And so maybe if I were to offer hope, I would do it by way of an analogy. 1988, 1989, we're old enough to remember those days. No one would have guessed that the Soviet Union was about to collapse. And so these structures and systems that can seem so powerful, I think often seem most powerful right before they overshoot and collapse, you know.
Who would have thought the whole attitude toward the gay community would collapse almost as fast as the Soviet Union did?
Yes, that's right. That's right. When you, even though for our gay brothers and sisters, you know, this is all happening, you know, slow.
Too slow.
But at the same time, you just think, for, you know, there have been gay people as long as there have been people, and they never would have guessed things could have changed as much as they have.
So quick.
Yeah.
The book Factfulness, you familiar with it?
I'm not familiar with it. No.
I want to urge it upon you. It's a Swedish doctor who's just died 2 years ago. The book is out maybe a year. And he goes through all the data about every socioeconomic dynamic you can find.
Yes.
And time after time after time, he demonstrates that things are a whole lot better than people think.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, it's very true. And that's important for us to keep in mind.
The number of girls who are going to school, the number of people who are immunized around the world, the dramatic decline in extreme poverty.
Yes.
We're in one of the most peaceful periods in world history.
Yes, we're so much less likely to die by violence than we've ever been. It's so true.
Even with this overarching climate crisis, there's so many things that are signs of hope in the world. Maybe not in the Christian world,
yes,
but in the human world.
Yes, and you know, I it's interesting you say maybe not in the Christian world, because I wouldn't have admitted this. I wouldn't have said this 10 years ago. But now I tend to think that all of my desires to see the Christian world turn it around and become the leaders, I don't think that's right. I think that however the Spirit of God works in the world, the people who think that they should be the leaders, I think the first will be last and the last will be first. Well, that seems to be the way.
You quoted Philippians 2
Yes.
about being the servant.
Yes.
We are to serve the world. And, you and I both grew up in a worldview that was always us against them.
Yes.
The insiders versus the outsiders.
Yes.
And the insiders were few.
Yes.
And the outsiders were many.
Yes.
Sometimes we call them the elect and the damned.
Yes.
But, I increasingly see the Christian community as part of the human community,
Yes.
and we're there to serve.
In fact, this is for an interesting sign of hope. This
Good.
wouldn't have been a sign of hope to me 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But I have to admit, it's a sign of hope to me now. I have a couple of rabbi friends. I think about this one amazing Rabbi Sharon Brous. I jokingly tell her she's my rabbi.
Sure.
She wrote a blog a couple of years ago, an article a couple of years ago, after Israel bombed Gaza and a bunch of children were killed. She wrote a blog and said, my Jewish faith makes me mourn the death of a Palestinian child as much as I would mourn the death of an Israeli child. And it was this beautiful, powerful thing. She received death threats. She received the most horrible kind of death threats, like, I know you have a daughter named X who goes to this elementary school and she gets out of school at 2:30 every afternoon.
Wow.
You had better learn how to shut up, So she received, but that didn't stop her. And every day, that's the kind of Judaism she lives, And I have, I think of this amazing Muslim activist I met. He was the former ambassador to the United States from South Africa. He was Nelson Mandela's ambassador, and he's a Muslim liberation theologian.
Wow.
And did you know that after Pope Francis came out with Laudato Si and called for all the people of the earth to hear the cries of the earth and the cries of the poor, Ibrahim, Rasul is his name, met with a group of Muslim scholars. It may be the largest group of Muslim theologians and scholars ever to be brought together. I think they were brought together in Turkey. And they came out with a statement that said that the use of fossil fuels is incompatible with Islam. Now imagine, these are the religious leaders of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran. I said to him, Ibrahim, how did you do this?
That's like a flower you see growing out of a rock.
Exactly. And you think all of the money that's coming, and he said it required great courage for these men to do this. But he said, all I had to do is remind them that wherever there's oil money, there's corruption. And if they had any desire for freedom and democracy, they needed an end to oil for that reason, not just for the environmental impact. And that was the added thing that gave them courage. And then I have a Sikh friend, from the Sikh religion, who has been on a journey that has made her, I think, understand the message and life of Jesus better than most Christian theologians I know. And so I look at these people and I just think, I wanted the Christian faith to be out there leading the way, but maybe the Spirit is taking people, working with people across, and something is happening so that none of us get there first.
I grew up, of course, in West Kentucky, where those on the outside included the Catholics.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
But last Sunday, I was in E-Town, Kentucky, and went to the Catholic Church, a large church where the pastor is a very dear friend of mine, Martin Leinbach. And communion came. And of course, I walked down, folded my hands, as a non-Catholic is supposed to do. But after he gave me a blessing, I put my arms around it. And I thought, That's a sign of hope.
It is,
It wouldn't have happened
Exactly
50
right.
years ago.
Exactly. On either side.
On either side.
Exactly right.
You had the Vatican, and then Vatican II Council that opened all of this up. Are you familiar with Tom Krottenmacher?
Yes,
You know Tom.
yes, I do. I love to read.
I
what he
love
writes.
Tom too, and his book, The Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower.
Yes, yes, yes.
He told me in an interview I did with him, he said, I'm not a Christian. And I said, I beg to differ. Because he is not in the established church,
Yeah.
but he is trying to follow Christ. And that's part of what you do in your books.
Well, this to me is part of that great spiritual migration.
It is.
It's part of what's happening. It's being awake to the idea that the marker, well, of course we as Christians shouldn't be surprised at this. Jesus didn't say, by their correct creeds and doctrinal confessions you shall know them.
Right.
He said, by their fruit you shall know them, by their love you shall know them, by the way they love each other. So what is really happening here is, maybe the biggest sign of hope you and I have to look at is, wow, I'm changing. I've changed.
I'm changing. Yes, for me to come out from where I was, where I grew up,
Yes.
the kind of person I was formed to be,
Yes.
to be in the migration
Yes.
that I feel that I'm a part of.
Yes. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Last night you quoted partially the Lord's Prayer.
Mm.
This morning you quoted partially the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah.
which is, I think, the most widely known, oft-repeated collection of words in human history.
I think you're right.
And I sat there thinking, you went on to talk about something else, but your quoting this left me thinking, what role, if any, do these 70 some odd words of what we call the prayer of Jesus, which is not really a Christian prayer,
Right.
do they gather up what you see and feel and what you hope for?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I grew up fundamentalist enough that we didn't say the Lord's Prayer.
Of course,
that
we
was
didn't
vain,
either.
That was vain repetition.
We had to learn it to get credit in Sunday school,
Yes.
but we didn't
Would never
pray
be
it
said
in the church.
liturgically. and you know, now I'm around a lot of Christians who do say it liturgically, but I'm not sure they're any better off, because it just becomes, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, in the kingdom. And it's just, it just said autopilot. But the older I get, I bet you feel the same way. The older I get, I'm just stunned by the profundity of those words.
Yes. It's not just a prayer, it's a summary of how we're to live.
It is.
And what we believe.
And I think it's actually it's an invitation into what my friend Richard Rohr calls a change in consciousness.
Yes.
It's if we actually let the prayer sink in. Could I just say something about
Sure.
that? Because you think, okay, our Father, suddenly that word our becomes
Who is included in the hour.
exactly right. And you realize for Jesus, the hour not only includes all people, it includes the birds of the air, because our Father in heaven knows every sparrow
I
that
hadn't
lands.
thought
on the ground.
about that, stretching it out even further.
And it includes the flowers. Our Father in heaven clothes the flowers of the field more than Solomon. So it's this, like in an ecological age, we realize that St. Francis wasn't just being poetic. Sister moon, brother sun, cousin fox, sister, wolf. We're all of this one family.
Wow.
So that line of the prayer, hallowed be thy name. Nadia Boltz-Weber said something to me about this a while back. She said, people are bringing God's name through the dirt. People are ruining God's name. Mm-hmm. They're using God to justify. Mm-hmm. May your name not be brought through the dirt by stupid, racist, bigoted, selfish, nationalistic, hateful people. Suddenly, I can pray that line.
Yeah. Or even by me.
Or by me.
Unintentionally
That's right.
ignorant and prejudiced as I am.
Exactly.
Don't let me bring it.
Don't let and in fact,
bring it.
Hallowed be thy name says, it evokes the Hebrew use of the unmentionable
Yes.
name. let me not reduce you into any small box, you know. And then it just goes on from there. I think your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven is the heart of the prayer. Everything else is prologue and commentary. And what it really is it sets us in the world with a longing for a different world, not one after this life. It's your kingdom come here. Yeah. And if I could make one wish, it would just be that people would move their comma or their breaths to not say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it, but we're to say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth.
Right.
As it is in heaven, because that's the locus of the Spirit.
That's the locus. That's the center of it, on earth as it is in heaven. Yeah. Well, you're helping to push us there and prod us there and pull us there. You've had a great career and a great influence of a lot of people.
I feel like I was talking to Bill McKibben, the environmental activist, or I can't remember if we were texting or emailing or what a couple months ago, and he said we're losing, but we're still fighting. And I thought, well, a lot's going wrong, but I feel more motivated than ever.
No, I do too. I'm not sure we're losing.
That's right.
Because you read books like Factfulness and see that a lot of things in the world are going right. We go to the Catholic Church and to a Sikh and to the Jewish synagogue, like I've been the last several weeks, and you realize that great parts of the landscape are so different than when you and I were growing up.
That's right, and that's the thing for Trump and Trumpism and all of this resurgence of white Christian nationalism that's happening. It's waking people up.
It is.
It's waking people up, and we don't know yet, and I don't think any of us can be complacent, but we don't know yet the effect this is having on our grandchildren. They could be swayed. They could be white Christian nationalists or white atheist nationalists, which might even be scarier, where their ultimate reality is this nationalism and racism fused together. Or they could be the most exciting, dynamic generation in history, and I'm voting for the latter.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming into the Meetinghouse. We've been talking to Brian McLaren about his books, The Great Spiritual Migration, out a couple of years ago, and his newest, I guess, The Galapagos Islands. I'm eager to read this, A Spiritual Journey. God bless you. God bless you, your ministry. Lead us on.
Keep up the good work, my friend.
Okay, very good. Thank you.